Is it possible to forgive a person who commits a violent criminal act which results in the taking of an innocent life? Stay tuned to Catholic Parents Online. Welcome to Catholic Parents Online, a program that deals with the issues that parents face while raising their children. I'm your host, Nancy Barrett. In this third and final segment on forgiveness, we will talk to a mother who experienced the death of her 20-year-old son at the hands of another. We will explore her personal grieving process and how, by faith, she was able to forgive and allow God to bring much good out of overwhelming pain and suffering. Joining us is a member of the national organization, Parents of Murdered Children, Beverly Barrett. Beverly, welcome. People are probably wondering, is there any relationship?
Yeah.
And there certainly is. I was blessed to meet at a very young age your beloved first son, Paul, your eldest child, fall in love with him and marry him. And so that makes us mother and daughter-in-law.
Right.
So this is a very precious interview for me, Beverly. And before we start, I want to thank you because obviously we are talking about a very sensitive nature, something that you have lived through that has been vulnerable and deeply tragic and hurtful in your life. And you are willing to talk about this to help others forgive. And so I thank you very, very much. Beverly, you have such a wonderful life, so rich and filled. Please tell us about you and your beautiful marriage to Dick and all of your children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren.
Well, Dick and I actually met through a church organization, a church discussion group. I was 18, just graduated from St. Agnes High School, and Dick was a very mature, 27 years old, and I think were attracted very spiritually at first, and I still feel that, of course, the Holy Spirit was our guiding light for our whole life. We had a very short engagement and married on September 8th, 1956.
Our Lady's birthday.
Right, at Blessed Sacrament Parish in St. Paul, where Dick had been most of his life. He had attended Blessed Sacrament. After, like I say, a short engagement, we decided we would buy a home near St. Catherine's College, which is where Dick was working at the time as an operating engineer. And Dick was a very traditional father, husband at the time, I should say. He wasn't a father yet, but he wanted me to quit my job at 3M, and he would be the main breadwinner. And so we bought a very simple home on Edgecombe Road and decided we would start a family of 12 children. Now, Dick was from a family of 11 children, and I have 2 sisters.
And you're in the middle.
And I was the middle one. So that was fine. I was thrilled to have a home to make for him and cook and to start thinking about raising this family. I loved being so close to the parish, which was Holy Spirit Parish. And of course, Dick and I did not know anything about the parish coming from the east side, but I just, again, feel our whole lives were guided by the Holy Spirit.
Oh, I've always referred to you and Dick as my in-laws, Mr. and Mrs. Holy Spirit.
Right. Well, I've been there 52 years now. They actually like to call me that at church too. So we both got involved in the groups there, Dick in the men's club, and I joined the Rosary Society and began to become active in their different events. I think they really liked the fact that I was so young, 19 years old, and was very eager to help. And I had a lot of good mentors there at the parish over the years. So as was God's will, we did not get pregnant for 2 years. So that was a time of just getting to know each other. And then in 1959, our son Paul,
Yay!
Nancy's husband, came along, and I actually had been asking the ladies at the rosary meetings when I would go to start praying for me, because it was sort of, you know, after you got married, well, are you expecting yet? No, no. Well, we'll pray for you. So when Paul came along, and then another 6 children actually within a year to a year and a half.
Oh my goodness.
I finally at one of the meetings got up and said, I think you don't need to pray anymore. I think we're doing okay here on our own. We did have 7 children, quite close, and I certainly loved being a mother and being a wife to Dick. He did change jobs at some point, and he did work shifts, so that was nice to have him home a lot in the daytime to help with the children and give me some time to get away too. And then we had like about a 4-year break in there, and then we had 2 younger children who were like first children again. And by that time we had the older children to help take care of them. And subsequently we have 14 grandchildren and 5 great-grandchildren. Starting with the older group, we had no problems at all. We had like the 3 older ones, and then we had 3 more, and then we had, of course, the younger 3. And we always like to refer to the middle group as the ones that really challenged our parenting skills. Yes. Dennis then was the middle child of the middle group.
Getting to the very tragic event of Dennis's life, if you wouldn't mind, Beverly, I hate to ask you to open up like this, but you're so generous. Tell us about your beloved son, Dennis, my beloved brother-in-law, and what happened to him on that very tragic night of November 3rd, 1984.
With a little background about Dennis, like I say, being the middle child, they always say they are a little more challenged in the family. Maybe they don't get as much attention. And he was a very quiet, very private kid growing up, but not a violent person at all, didn't get into a lot of fights or anything. Once he started in high school, he smoked a little marijuana, and he got in a few little incidents with the police. Nothing real serious, but he was in Totem Town for a while. He was also at a camp up north for boys, troubled boys. We were happy that we had outside resources to help us parent him, because it is challenging. With a big family like that, you really need others to help you through this.
Yeah, I thought you and Dick were very wise to put Dennis in that camp. I remember Paul and I went to the graduation where we actually traveled with the family and learned that he had really learned heroic skills out in the wilderness to take care of himself, feed himself, keep himself clean and protected. And I think he grew up a lot during that time.
When he came back from that camp, he really felt that he could make it now and try to continue in school and not get involved with his drugs. But he had a group of friends, and friends are very strong influence, obviously, on teenagers. So he would even say to us, well, I'm going to go out with the guys, you know, but I'll try to get home on time or whatever. But at some point, he really was using again, and at the time, he had to move out. We just said, if you're using drugs, we really can't have you here in the home, especially with the younger boys in the family too. So he got a house he rented with some other fellows. It wasn't that far away from us. It was all in the neighborhood. And then he was looking for employment, and he did get a job at Woolies in downtown St. Paul, working as a like a busboy, yeah. The night of November 3rd then was a Saturday night, and after work, he was working a 3 to 11 shift, and after work at 11 o'clock, he went over to neighbors in the area, in the neighborhood. He wasn't a neighbor, but only about 5 blocks from our home, and they had what they call a kegger. Mm-hmm. Now, he had not been drinking, and he was looking for some of his friends, but as it turned out, his friends weren't there. There were some guys there. He did not know these other fellas. They were from another part of St. Paul, and they were looking to pick a fight. So Dennis got involved in arguing with these fellows, and they went outside, and one of the fellows who earlier in the evening had showed around a knife stabbed him, and it didn't immediately kill him, but he started to run, and he ran into an alley, and then these guys took off.
Were there not three stabbing wounds?
The mortal wound was like to the aorta, and so he started to bleed, obviously, and at some point was bleeding so that he passed out in an alley, and someone found him there later and called the paramedics. Then these fellows, of course, took off, and we were called about midnight of that Saturday night from the Regions Hospital to say that our son was there and he was severely injured. So we went down, and by the time we got there, they already ushered us into a separate room, and then they told us that they were doing everything they could to save his life, but it wasn't very long that the surgeon came in and told us that, you know, Dennis was dead. And we were able then to see him. They let us look at his body. It was still warm and all, so we could touch him and say our goodbyes. Obviously, we were very much in shock at that time.
Obviously, because I have my own memories of what went on in our household. Paul, working for the St. Paul Fire Department, worked that shift that night of the guys that would respond. He wasn't on the truck that responded to Dennis's murder, but he was told, you called him in the morning and let him know what had happened. And then I think some of the firemen were wondering, could this be a relation to Paul Barrett? And these are the same guys that work with him. So it was a very confusing time, and he came home that Sunday morning, told me what had happened. We were both in unbelievable shock. I remember having sat in our living room. I was newly pregnant with Rose, our third child. Angela was just 3, and baby Paul had just turned 1. And I remember calling my folks and telling them, and then I remember feeling a freezing cold draft in the house. And I think we'd probably been in the house, maybe in the living room, talking about this and grieving and really in shock for about 2 hours, and didn't realize that when Paul came home from work, he had left the back door open. And it just goes to show, I think, what the news of something that traumatic can do, that even with babies and all, we weren't even aware that it was very cold. The wind was blowing. It was a very cold November morning, and I thought, oh my goodness, we never closed the back door. But that just is kind of an example of what shock does to the system. But yeah, I remember Dick carrying baby Paul up the aisle at Holy Spirit for the procession of the funeral. And I remember Paul, being the eldest son, got up after the funeral and spoke to the congregation, thanking them for their great outpouring of love and support. But the entire event was, of course, so tragic, Beverly.
Paul was able to read that story that Dennis had written. One of the things that was so special about Dennis was that he did love to write poetry and write stories about his life and his struggle with drugs, but his very close spirituality, very close to God, and he talked about that a lot in his writings. He didn't speak about it, but he wrote a lot of that.
Right, and there was such depth in him. There was nothing on the surface about Dennis. He was just so profoundly deep, especially for such a young guy, and being a guy too. I think men don't often at that age open up with their feelings. And if it's okay, I would love to share the beautiful poem that Paul read to the congregation after the funeral mass that day. These are thoughts of Dennis's, of how Jesus spoke to him, as you well know, Beverly. And reading this back, it really brought back the whole event. I want to save you from the life you're in, living in sorrow, lust, and sin. You're beautiful deep inside. No using drugs, you can't hide. Let out your true, real person. Come, I'll tell you. Please listen. Taking risks, playing life like a game. Come with me. and it won't be the same. Too proud to admit when you're wrong, too weak to admit that you're not strong. Come and be real with me. It's easy to feel when you are free. You go around lying every day. That proves you're dying every day. Come, please, I wish you would. Please do. I know you could. I don't want you to hurt, just to help you, so we both can let you be you. That was really touching, Beverly.
The services and all were very comforting to us. I think that is when we realized how important our faith community was at that time, how people rallied around us and brought food to the home and called, and anytime we were needing somebody to talk to, they were there. Fella that was taken in, they found him right away. There were enough people there at the party that knew his name and sort of knew where they lived and had their license plate and all. So when the young man was picked up and brought in by a detective, he was told that he was being arrested for an assault. And we heard all of this. It was all recorded, and we heard it all at a hearing, how he was told about Dennis, being assaulted. And at some point they said, well, actually now we're charging you with homicide because Dennis has died. And the young man started crying, and, he sounded like he didn't intend. He just was in a fight and he had been drinking. He didn't really know what he did. A detective at some point should have said, well, I think maybe you need a lawyer here,
Yes.
But he did not. And he just went on questioning him more about how it happened and where the knife was. And so when we got to the point of going to a hearing and all this was played to us, the prosecutor said to us, they're going to bring all this in if we go to a trial. And they actually can't use any of that tape where he's confessing because he didn't have a lawyer present.
Unbelievable.
And we didn't understand about plea bargaining, but our prosecutor just said, I think you should just go with, they're offering a 3-year plea bargain. And so, at that point already, neither Dick or I had any anger or wanting to, revenge this man, because we didn't know him. We hadn't even seen him, obviously, until the time of the hearing. We were still in shock and really just not knowing what was going to happen next with our family. So we accepted the plea bargain, and he actually served 2 years I think it was one more. He was 20 years old also, so I don't think he went to Stillwater, but Dick followed his life there in prison for a couple years, and then, I don't know what happened to him afterwards. But it certainly affected all of our family differently. The older kids certainly were more affected that were closer to Dennis. The 2 younger boys were like 8, 9 years old, and they didn't really understand what was going on. It was certainly traumatic because Dick and I were both, in a trauma situation, and they were watching us in our grief. So over the years, they certainly all have dealt with Dennis's death differently.
Well, Beverly, in spite of the fact that you witnessed that, saw your beautiful son on his deathbed, wounded so terribly, and were not able to defend him, to protect him, had to live with knowing that some stranger at some spontaneous event did this very violent act. You and Dick did not stifle yourselves. You did not stay stagnant, and you did not stay in a cocoon. This tragic event, through this, the grace of God just filled both of you. I mean, one of you as much as the other, to do so much amazing work for the church and for human beings that our cup runneth over when I think of all that you did. It's just remarkable. Can you tell us what came out of that great grief?
The first year, Dick went into almost like a depression, and he did go to work, but it was very hard for him. And I just saw a notice in the paper one day about a support group, and it was called Parents of Murdered Children. Now they were meeting out in New Hope, and I encouraged him to go to that group. We had been involved in other support groups with some of the other children and some of their problems. So he eventually said, okay, we'll go to the group. And we certainly found our peace in listening to other parents who had gone through homicide in their families. And then he felt like at some point he really wanted to start a group in St. Paul. And so we had a group meet in our home twice a month. And we publicized it through a little newsletter, and we were on First Call for Help. So we did get a lot of phone calls from folks, and a lot of times they just wanted to talk. They didn't
remember you had a 24-hour hotline.
Right, yeah. They didn't want to come to the support group, but they would just talk on the phone. And then sometimes they would come, and we would just all sit around in our home and share our stories. And it seemed to be healing to continually, as hard as that seems like for most people, to have to keep talking about it, it is a very healing thing. Many of the people who came had such anger and were just so filled with wanting to see that person who murdered their child or their mother. They wanted to see them put to death, you know, and we never felt that way. Dick and I really had not felt that that was going to be any part of our healing process. So we let it go. And in 1987, Dick decided that he had a calling to the diaconate program. And I know that all of this experience working with the support group and all, and just having a large family to deal with. He had a lot of good experience that he might be able to help in the diaconate program. So we went into that together, and we both went through all the classes together. It was a wonderful experience for me that I didn't go to college, so I didn't have any real spirituality or religious training beyond high school. So it was a real adult formation for my faith. So that was 3 years of kind of a healing process for Dick and I too. Many times when people have experienced a homicide or any tragedy, I guess for that matter, in their lives, the couple grows apart and many times divorce happens. Where in this case, when we went into formation together, we were sort of forced to talk to each other about our feelings and how raising the children and having the homicide and all the other things, we were forced almost to deal with our feelings, and we became much closer together. And again, our spirituality was strengthened. So it was a beautiful time. And then in 1990, Dick was ordained, and we began to serve together at our parish at Holy Spirit in St. Paul. And his most favorite ministry, I guess, was the funeral ministry. He really liked being with people, whether it was the death of a child or a sudden death or an older parent. He just seemed to just glow with being with those people.
Yes,
over
we
the
often
years.
joked at all the birthday parties and all the family events that it would be, Dick would be talking about his beloved funerals. And actually, I really enjoyed visiting with him and talking about the funerals with him at those events. It's a great memory for me. But both of you were so involved with bereavement and counseling and helping individuals who were grieving.
Right. He also became a police chaplain for St. Paul and was called out at all times of the day and night to notify people of a homicide or a suicide or even an accidental death. He was involved with going to the home and being there when the family was called and brought in, and he would sit with them again and cry with them. He really never got over Dennis's death and the grief that he had, the loss there. And people would listen to him because he'd been there, and they felt he could feel their
Beverly,
pain.
He did. When he looked at you and he empathized, and the tears would come from his eyes. And it was so raw and so real that you just felt that there was a soulmate. Even if there was a stranger, Dick looking in your eyes would make you feel, that guy knows what I'm going through. It really was special.
Another part of his work then eventually was helping to form another group, which was called Victim Intervention Program at the time. And that's an ongoing thing too for victims of homicide, suicide, or accidental death. So we'll have those resources later.
Definitely. We'll put up the parents of murdered children information, all of it. So Beverly, this is such a tender, I've never even talked to you about this, and it's something that I'm just very interested to know if you even are willing to answer this question. After 23 years, Dennis is gone with God. This young man is grown up now, would be what, 43 years old? What would you say to him today if you had the opportunity to speak to him?
I would tell him that I never felt anger or wanted to see him suffer or be put to death or anything like that from the very beginning. I would say I didn't know you. I didn't know your background and how you were raised. And you were in prison for 2 years, which doesn't seem like a lot to most people, but to me that would be the most terrible thing, to have a child in prison. And I hope that when you got out that you maybe learned something from this, and maybe you were able to turn your life around like Dennis had, we felt, had turned his life around before he was killed. And maybe you would have, gone on to be a productive citizen.
You have great charity. You're a wonderful example. They say sometimes that sons look for women like their mothers, but I can't take credit for that. You're a wonderful woman. Thank you, Beverly. I love you. God bless you. Some of us hold a grudge forever because of a sarcastic look or a derogatory remark that someone made many years ago. Hopefully, after having heard Beverly Barrett's story of forgiveness, each of us will be convicted to soften our hearts, forgive the grievances we have against others, and receive the peace that comes from God alone. Thanks for watching. God bless you and yours.